three questions on the cash report.
ahead,
The first one has to do with a company, Crisis Go Incorporated, and it's crisis management software. I'd be interested to know what the value of what the crisis management software is doing.
I can take that question for you, Chair Davis.
Go ahead, Chair.
Yes, it's new software related to COVID protocols that we're putting in that allow us to communicate with all of our employees in a more, I guess, seamless or efficient fashion. And we can come back to the board with an update on all of our protocols and include a deeper discussion of that item.
That would be great. I appreciate that. And thanks for that initial explanation. The next one has to do a little bit further down the page. It's regional government services, and it talks about personnel recruitment.
Yes, RGS is a professional services group that we work with to help us with placement of certain staff positions. And they're currently working with us on the Director of Finance and Administration.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, the way it was described as regional government, I was wondering if that was something that came from SBCAG or something. And then the last one has to do with CalSTART Incorporated and membership. Maybe you could just refresh me on what our annual dues are and what CalSTART actually is.
Yeah, CalSTART's a nonprofit group that's been in the industry for decades, maybe 30 years now, based out of Southern California. I believe they're also the administrator of the HVIP program. They have a really good relationship with the state of California, and they do a great job of keeping us up to date on a lot of the different grant opportunities, that sort of thing. We've actually partnered with them on our application to the California Energy Commission for the blueprint for medium and heavy duty infrastructure changes. So it's a good outfit. They have a lot of good resources. We've been lucky to be a member of that organization for a number of years.
Well, thank you for that information. And that's all the questions that I had on the cash report, Chair.
Good. Thank you, Director Sheeler. Any other questions on the cash report or the minutes? Oh, do I have a motion for the approval of the consent calendar?
So approved.
I have Chuck as the Mr. Director McCrory is first, Director Tabor is the second. I will do a roll call vote. Director Prodi is absent. Director Lemberger.
Aye.
McCrory.
Yes.
Weinberg is absent. Sheeler.
Yes.
Tabor. Vice Chair Tabor.
Yes.
Chair Davis votes yes. The consent calendar is approved. Thank you all. Including the consent calendar takes us to public comment, item 6. This is for people who wish to speak on items not on the agenda today, but related to the business of MTD. Madam Clerk, do we have anyone who wants to speak under public comment here?
I don't have any public comments at this time.
Okay, thank you very much. Moving right along. Item 7, commercial auto and general liability insurance renewal. I want to go to Mr. Estrada to open the item, and we'll see who makes the presentation.
Thank you, Chair Davis. I'm going to hand this off to Mr. Cortez, Rafael Cortez, our risk administrator, to update you on this item and seek the board's approval. Mr. Cortez, it's all yours.
Good morning, Chair Davis, members of the board, Mr. Estrada.
Good morning.
The 2021-2022 commercial auto and general liability insurance policy renewal. MTD's risk department is making the recommendation to proceed with the renewal. I would like to highlight the following for you. Coverage will remain the same as what was approved by the board last year, increasing the total coverage limit from 10 million to 15 million, less the 250,000 self-insured retention. This continues to be the most cost-effective option for MTD. The insurance industry continues to experience the effects of a hard market, and with a large open claim has resulted in a 32% premium increase. With the help of Mr. Thatch in the past, other options have been explored through other carriers such as Travelers Insurance and National Interstate Insurance. The company continues to offer a better package. MTD's risk department has conducted a thorough research of other options such as a JPA pooled program, and it was found that costs would be significantly higher than what we currently have in place. Pricing depends on the selected self-insured retention deductible options, but from research, it is estimated that the premiums would significantly exceed what is currently in place. This is an action item, and MTD's Risk Department is making the recommendation to the board to approve renewal of the commercial auto and general liability insurance policy. This time, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you very much. Do I have questions at this point? I do have a question for Mr. Fatch in a second, but does anyone on the board have a question here? Director Sheeler, Bill?
Thank you, Chair. I have several here. I guess just wanted to point out and ask if I've got this correctly, is that the approximate increase over the expiring policy is 32%. And we had a pretty big jump in our policy just a year before that when we decided to go to the higher level of coverage. So we will have gone from 314,000, 1819 to 561 with a renewal this year. The summary speaks outside of the large claim that MTD experienced. And it said without it, the large claim would have been, the increase is 32%. And that the large claim, without it, it would have been in the 20 to 25% range. So I guess maybe that demonstrates the impact on the policy of the large claim. And then a question now is there any, as the fleet changes from diesel to battery electric, does that change any of the insurance coverage?
As far as changing the type of vehicle, Mr. Fatch, would you be able to help me out answering this question?
Yes. Yeah, I think I unmuted myself. Thank you. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Bob.
No, the only thing that changes things, the dynamic slightly in the makeup of your fleet, is the articulated versus the non-articulated buses. They're slightly more expensive because of the passenger size and the slightly greater difficulty involved in maneuvering articulated buses versus the non-articulated. It would probably also make a difference if the passenger size fell below, in any one bus below like 16 or something like that. But whether they're diesel or gas or electric or gasoline doesn't have any bearing on the pricing of the insurance.
All right. And then my last question is this pretty much being experienced across the board with other transit districts, this level of increase?
I'll respond to that, but I know Raphael, or I believe Raphael can give a little greater response because I know there were some surveys done of some other districts. Just in general, National Interstate Insurance Company, virtually all they do is insure public transit and charter operations. That's their whole book of business across the United States. And the kind of increase that they're experiencing for all of their book of business is in this 25-26% range, regardless of, kind of as a base before we talk about claims experience. So in general, the answer is going to be yes to that. There are some pools that are having more difficulty than you are with your program, risk management pools like JPAs and so forth. And some of that is tied to the structuring of their reinsurance and how they have to pool together the price of their reinsurance for their higher limits for their whole group. But right now, through the years, MTD has speculated from time to time about the advantages of being on your own, so to speak, versus being a part of a pooled group. And we've always liked the idea of controlling our own pricing by not being subject to the experience of a pool that might have bad claims experience. And I think it's really showing here that that your pricing is more a function of the whole insurance company versus just a pool of maybe 20, 30 districts. So I don't know, I hope I answered the question.
And to add to what Bob just stated, that is correct. We did do a research on JPA programs, and it does appear that they have also experienced increases, which, as Bob mentioned, that they take into account each one's experience modification rate. and affects all of the agencies that are in there together. We did do research on some of our neighboring agencies, and they did experience increases as well. So again, our policy with National Interstate is the best option available to MTD.
Okay, thank you very much for that explanation. I know that we worked with this company for many, many years. And then my last question is, how long does a significant claim affect future premiums?
Raphael, would you like me to address that?
Please, Bob.
Yeah, it's a good question, Mr. Scheller. There are a couple of dynamics going on with your claim. One is whether or not the claim pierces the second 5 million of insurance. Right now, it's still inside the first 5 million or first 4.75 million of your limit. And I've spoken numerous times with the National Interstate Claims Department. They're hopeful that they can, that the claim will remain inside that first layer. Having an open claim of significance like this makes marketing extremely difficult with other companies. They just really aren't interested in coming in to quote until they know the outcome of the open claim. So that's the biggest factor, that if National Interstate was like many companies that wrote a little bit of transit and a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and National Interstate said, well, this is an account that we've run our course with, it's time for us to part company, and they issued notices of non-renewal, and we were forced to go out to the market, we would really have our hands tied behind our back with the open claim until it's closed. So once the claim is closed, things will pretty much return to normal with regards to pricing. You won't be beat up over the claim anymore. So 3 years is probably a normal time, but National Interstate is when they saw this claim, they felt they needed about 50 to 60% of rate increase in your account, and that's pretty well behind us now. So what we're going to be experiencing going forward, assuming the claim runs its course, is just market trends rather than your claims experience.
Thank you, Mr. Fatch. And Chair, that's all the questions that I had. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Anything else from other board members? Director Tabor, Vice Chair Dave?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just making sure I understand the chart here on the per unit pricing under the renewal. It says NA. With our service levels down and not as many buses on the road, does that mean we're not paying insurance on the buses that are parked in the lot?
You referred to the NA on line of coverage financial information report. Is that it?
Correct.
Okay, so that was in the prior years. That was for 1920 and 1819. That's referring to the access coverage umbrella. Initially, we had the 10 million. So that's referring to the $15 million of coverage, which I had indicated previously. We didn't have it in 2018 to 19 or 19 to 20.
Okay, it's underlined. It's called spare transit bus.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
21, 22.
Per unit pricing. Okay, got it. So we don't have any spare transit buses. My understanding with reviewing it with Mr. Fatch was that if the buses are not in use, they were not going to be listed on our policy. Is that correct, Ms. Fetch?
Yes. Last year we had, Raphael, was it 3 buses or 5 buses that were not in use but could be called into service in the event of a breakdown of another vehicle? And so what National Interstate did was that they reduced the pricing on those buses, knowing they were just spares, and that doesn't exist this year. So those buses have been taken off the fleet.
Great. Okay. Any other questions? Someone brought up the price increase of 25% solely based on the pricing of reinsurance. So Bob, I'm going to ask you to get out there and speculate for me. Tell me a little bit about the current health and your thoughts on the future direction of the reinsurance market.
Wow. So I'll try to be brief and keep it on point, Dave. The things that are affecting the reinsurance market are large losses that have occurred in the industry, not necessarily in transit, although there is some escalating claims in transit and commercial auto, but a lot of it is driven by property insurance. So the insurance companies have a certain amount of capacity to write insurance, and it's tied to their liquidity. And the liquidity is tied to the surplus that they hold against written premium that they have. So they have to maintain a policyholder surplus of about 50% above their written premium. So they can pay out 100% of their written premium in claims and still have another 50% of that in surplus in the event that their claims exceed their written premium. So what's happened is insurance companies have so greatly exceeded their written premium in claims payments on property losses and other significant losses around the country that their surplus has reduced. And when their surplus reduces, it means that, like, for example, if an insurance company wrote $1 million of premium and they had 500,000 surplus, which is a 2-to-1 ratio between surplus and written premium, and they lost half of their surplus, so now they only have 250,000 of surplus. The next year they could only write 500,000 of premium to maintain a 2-to-1 ratio between written premium and surplus. So if they wrote $1 million of premium the prior year and they can only write 500,000 this year, they've got to non-renew a bunch of business. Plus they want price increases, which causes them to have to non-renew more business. So then that business that's being non-renewed is flowing out to other places in the market, and it's putting great demands on every insurance company's demands for written premium and maintaining their surplus to written premium ratios. And that's what we call creates a hard market. And that's what we're in right now. And it's still climbing. And hard markets tend to go up really fast. And when insurance companies reach a point where their written premiums and their surplus are in good ratios, then they start getting aggressive again and start writing premium and to grow, because their their stockholders want the companies to make money. And they do that by writing more insurance business. And in their infinite wisdom, about the only way insurance companies have figured out to write new business is to lower their prices. So they lower their prices to attract more business, and that falls down slowly. And over a 10, 15-year period, eventually prices get so low they can't support the claims, and boom, it all happens over again.
Yeah, I really appreciate the explanation, because I think underlying all this is there, and that is our future. And again, I hearken back, and some of us hearken back to our early analysis of climate change effects, and we're basically saying the next decade it's going to really be hard on the reinsurance market, and that's going to filter down to all of us. So it was very interesting to see how it's filtered down just right here at MTD in terms of our bus insurance. Thank you so much for that explanation. It's a really good one. Okay, so here we are. We need a motion basically to recommend renewal of the commercial auto and general liability insurance coverage with NIIC. Do I have a motion or any comments, any action? Director Vice Chair Tabor.
I'll make a motion to approve the renewal or recommend approval of the renewal.
Okay, I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, Director McQuarrie has seconded. I will do a roll call vote. Director Prodi is absent. Director Lindberger.
Aye.
Director McQuarrie.
Yes.
Director Weinberg is absent. Director Sheeler.
Yes.
Vice Chair Tabor.
Yes.
Chair Davis votes yes. Motion passes 5-0 with 2 absent. Raphael, great report. Good report. And Bob, thank you for being here, and thank you for your explanation for my speculative question there.
You're welcome.
Again, good report here, folks. Very
Thank you,
good.
Chair Davis. Thank you, members of the board.
You're welcome. Welcome
Chair
aboard
Davis?
there. Yes.
Point of order, I just wanted to note that there was no public comment for this item.
You caught me. Got me. You got me. And I actually have here to check off, and I hadn't checked it off. Thank you. Thank you,
You're welcome.
Christina.
Thank you to Hillary too. She also got it.
Okay. Keep us honest. Got it going. Okay. Thank you, Bob. Thanks for being here this morning. That's going to take us on to item 8. This is the California Integrated Travel Project.
Yeah,
General Manager Estrada, you want to open it up?
sure. Thank you, Chair. As the board may remember, we've discussed this on occasion, but we haven't provided you with a presentation. So I want to hand this off to Ms. Blackerby, our Planning and Marketing Manager, to share a little bit more in depth about what we're working with Cal ITP. Hillary, all yours.
Good morning, Hillary.
Morning, Chair and Board. Good to be with you today, and really, really excited to talk to you about Cal ITP and contactless payment demonstration. So next slide. So first, excuse me, and I explained this sort of more in depth in the staff report, but just for a little background for the California Integrated Travel Project. This was a project that was started actually back in 2018. It's sort of flown by at this point. That was originally started in the California State Transportation Agency and then housed in Caltrans. And it's funded by cap and trade funds. Like so many things we hold dear here in public transit in California. And the goal of Cal ITP is to make travel simpler and more cost effective for everyone. And that's getting at that in roughly 3 ways, though the umbrella seems to be getting bigger and then they're sort of taking more in. And that's enabling contactless payments, automating customer discounts, and standardizing information for easy trip planning. So one thing to describe basically what is a contactless payment. Contactless payment, whoop, I don't know if you can see the slide, but it went away for me. There we go. Okay, all right. So contactless payment essentially means something, a method of paying that doesn't involve it doesn't involve cash. It doesn't involve the swiping of something or inserting a chip. It's really something you can pay for by tapping. And I'll talk a little more about validators and exactly how people would be able to pay. But it's something that's happening more out in the world. If you have a credit or debit card that has a little sort of tap symbol, you can use that. Apple Pay, Google Pay on your smartphone. Some people even have an Apple Watch that they can pay with by tapping. Those are all examples of contactless payment. Also, if you've been on transit in Los Angeles or other major cities, right, there's smart cards that are tap, and that's contactless, but sort of a difference between open loop and closed loop systems. I've learned a lot about technical things to do with payments that I never thought I would. Automating customer discounts, that's things like, we have all kinds of pass types, so senior discounts, youth, things to do with college pass agreements, things like that. And then standardizing information for easy trip planning has to do with, and it's something we've done here at MTD over the past 5 years or so, getting people, schedule and route information in an easy technical format, like in Google Maps or on an app, and then real-time information as well, which we've obviously had for a few years. So next slide. So the statewide goals of the program are to improve the customer experience. And the customer is actually both the transit rider, the traveler through the state, but also transit agencies are also a customer in this. We want to increase transit ridership. Of course, that's everyone's goal. That's a huge goal and makes sense. It's a goal of the state of California. Lower costs for transit providers and riders, basically using the negotiating power and buying power of the state to make things cheaper and easier for us and for our riders. Of course, reduce greenhouse gas emissions to reach environmental targets. That's what it's all about. And that, of course, like I said, this project is funded by cap and trade dollars. And then promote equitable access to transportation across the state's transit providers. One thing that I really appreciate about this project and about the people leading it is we're talking a lot about technology. We're talking about a lot about payments, smartphones, things like that. And instead of looking at it of like, well, look, not everyone has a smartphone or not everyone is banked or whatever, but we're going to capture these others. They've sort of flipped that on their head and said, okay, there's a lot of unbanked or underbanked people. How can we use this project as a way to get them some type of payment system that doesn't involve them having to get a bank account or something like that. And so really equity is infused in a lot of this, and we're excited to see how that goes. Next slide. I mentioned they're doing a lot of work for transit agencies. And so what they've created, and you can check this out if you just search on the web for California Mobility Marketplace. I forget what the exact URL is, but they've created a place where transit agencies can go in, and they've done and they're doing lots of sort of procurement legwork for transit agencies, for validators, for payment processors, all kinds of things that an agency would need to get this going. And like I said, using the negotiating and procurement power of the state of California, while also making sure that the things that are sort of on these lists for procurement meet all these specific standards. And a lot of Cal ITP's early work involved coming up with a set of standards. So the point was not the state of California is going to make its own app, or they're going to build the best validator or anything like that. The idea was to make standards about general transit feed specifications. So basically route and schedule information, formats, make sure that those are technically working, make sure that the agencies have what they need to make that work well and have the quality be high. And then also make sure that transit agencies are getting the best deal possible when they procure hardware or software for these kinds of things, and that what they're getting has all the components that they really need to be successful. If you've dealt with any industry where someone's trying to sell you something for your business, you'll know that they're going to try to sell you something. That's their job, but it doesn't necessarily have all the components that you need. And a lot of times you don't necessarily even know what you need. So this has been really helpful. Next slide. Next slide, please.
Sorry, Hillary, I am working on it. There we go.
Great, thank you. So these are, some of these slides get a little in the weeds. I'm not going to go deep into that, but I do want to just talk over areas of focus for the project. And like I said, it sort of started small, and as the people working on the project sort of pull a thread, then they find another thing that needs help and needs work, which has been great. And we've been involved with MTD for over a year now in different aspects. They've really been talking to a lot of people at transit agencies to find out, how does that work? How do you do that? And then they've got a lot of really smart people working on it and mapping that out and talking to different agencies across the state to see what's missing, what are the gaps, and how could they help fill that. So one of them is mobility service data. This basically is, I mentioned this in the staff report, what's called a general transit feed specification, GTFS. There's two aspects of that. There's the static feed, and that's something that we've had for many years. It's why our routing and scheduling has been in Google Maps, if you Google Transit, right? If you want to plan a trip on transit. And then the newer version is GTFS RT, which stands for real time. And that is a sort of live feed that also now feeds to Google Maps, but it's what feeds our our bus tracker app. That is real-time information about where buses are, what the schedules are, they early, are they late, that kind of thing. And that information, Cal ITP has been working on getting that, make sure that that is quality data, make sure that it's clean and correct so that we put it out into the world and people know what to expect. Payment issuance, again, I alluded to this. They've been working and thinking about, you know, specifically the most vulnerable folks in the state who are unbanked or underbanked. They don't have a credit card, they don't have access to credit, they might not have a debit card, right? We're talking about people who go to check cashing places, you know, on payday or before payday, and don't have, and generally are our riders and generally have to pay cash, you know, per, like, can't even afford the outlay of certainly a monthly pass or maybe even a 10 ride pass. It's kind of a pay as you go situation. And so, you know, conversations about ways to make it more equitable payment wise. Payment acceptance, providing open loop payments to the transit industry in California. And so that means it's easier for riders, but also that agencies are confident. So really briefly, the difference between open loop and closed loop. I mentioned, let's say if you've taken transit in the Bay Area, you've ridden BART, AC Transit, Muni, you might have paid cash, but probably you had you've done it in the past several years, a Clipper card. Mine's probably somewhere in here, but generally a hard plastic card that you can load money onto, you can, you know, put a pass on at one of their ticket vending machines, and sometimes at other outlets. There's stored value, things like that. When you want to spend that money, there's really, the only place you can spend it is on a transit system that takes it, right? Which is nice, especially in the Bay Area where there's so many transit agencies that accept the Clipper card. LA, similar with the TAP card, but that's a closed loop system. I can pay for the BART ticket, but when I get off and I want to buy a cup of coffee, I got to get another card, I got to get cash out, right? So I've got a bunch of different, and I can tell you, back when I went places, my wallet was full of a smart card for every different transit agency, because I usually travel throughout the state, you know, not in a car or a plane. And so every different, you know, I've got the Sacramento one, got LA, got San Diego, all that stuff, which is nice when you get there. But again, if it could be seamless open loop, meaning my debit card, my credit card, or a card that is sort of system neutral, doesn't matter if it's a bus or a coffee shop or CVS, the grocery store, whatever, it would work that way. And that's all built on something called what we refer to as EMV, which stands, it's a standard, a payment standard, which stands for Europay, MasterCard, and Visa. And it's basically the type of system that the vast majority of debit and credit cards and other payment cards work on around the world, actually. Eligibility verification, again, one of the goals of this project, though it won't be in our first phase, is to really think about that identity verification process, right? So for us, we've got seniors, 62 and over, pay reduced fare, individuals with disabilities, you know, they fill out a form, go through a process to get a mobility ID to then be able to pay that lower fare. K through 12 youth, college, all that stuff. And so basically each transit agency has to set up their own system for eligibility verification, right? Sometimes it's looking at an ID or, like I said, having them fill out a form, things like that. The ideal is that we could use systems that already exist. Guess who knows how old you are? The DMV, right? They have a big system that has that database, that has that information, and that's something that Cal ITP is working on so that that could work seamlessly for your, if you were, say, 66 years old and you have, and you want to ride the bus, instead of having to show your ID and you want to have a contactless payment, we could get your sort of mobile credential squared away so that when you tap your payment, whatever form it's in, it knows that you're eligible for that discount. And so that can really reduce some barriers and also protect privacy, where we could get out of the business possibly of knowing how old people are and knowing about their disabilities, because that could be handled on the back end, not by us. And then mobility accounts, thinking about account-based systems. This could go very deep. We could get to a point where you could have some type of account where it pays for the bus, it pays for bike share, pays for your train ticket, all that into like a multimodal fare payment system. Thinking about how employers contribute or don't. And, obviously there are tax benefits to providing subsidy to employees for not driving alone, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of opportunity here, and we're really just scratching the surface. Next slide, please. Okay, so basically this is a page from the sort of playbook that Cal ITP has been developing for us to work with. And this is, just want to show you sort of like the steps and what's happening internally. And I'll talk about our phases. They've been great. We have not had to figure this out on our own. We have very regular meetings. I mentioned that we've been participating for a long time. We've been in focus groups. We've been interviewed about all kinds of components of our system. Jerry has served on a task group, I forget exactly what it's called, but for over a year, I think. And that's been really helpful. I've been dealing on a sort of peer group with other transit agencies, talking about how we work with our technology. So it's been great that they've provided this space to do that. And they've also provided, frankly, a lot of hours of support and consultants and staff time to help us figure this out. So they're working on procurement and bringing folks together, steps, all the contracting, getting that squared away for sort of handling by MTD. Then we would go into installation and testing, marketing and communications, of course, and then going live. So next slide. Okay, I'm definitely not going to get into the weeds on this because it is very complicated. Though they've made it the least complicated you possibly could. But basically, the back end of processing payments, right? So currently, what do? Currently we're not collecting fares. But when we're collecting fares, normally what are we doing? People are paying cash on board. That money is, brought back, handled here by our folks, eventually, taken to the bank, but all that cash is handled. We print passes, our paper passes, we accept those. That information goes through the fare box. That information, obviously when people purchase passes, however they do that, we handle all of that. A lot of it involves cash, of course. Then they run their pass through the fare box. That information goes through the fare box. That all is handled on the sort of ridership and processing side. So we have that information. And then we've got our pass programs with the university and community college. That information goes through a different method altogether. We also do accept credit cards to our ticket vending machines, and that's another sort of payment processing relationship. So there's three things. There's the payment acceptance devices. That's what we call the validators, and I'll show you what that looks like here in a sec. Transit processing services, which is sort of the entity that will interact with the payments that are going on and us to sort of true up what we're owed, what went on in all those transactions. And then the payment processing services is something that, you know, basically any entity that takes credit or debit cards, right, has to have like a payment processing services agreement. And so the state's been working on all of these. We didn't have to go find, find that, do a big RFP, do that. The state's been handling all those procurement aspects. And that's what they call LPAs, or leveraged procurement agreements. And so the state's the one with the leverage. But by doing that kind of on behalf of transit agencies in California, of which there are over 300, this is really helpful. So this is these master contracts. Of course, we've dealt with things like this for procurement for bus purchases, something that's on state contract or some type of consortium, same sort of idea. And so they were competitively procured and negotiated, but those terms and those better prices, those better, processing percentages, that is what we're getting from the state that they've sort of bargained on our behalf. And so this package that they're offering us is for 6 months. I'll show you in one of the next slides kind of what that cost looks like. And then after that, we can decide how we want to move forward. So next slide. So this is what those three things were. Like I mentioned, the payment processor, it's the connection to the network of this is a very English term, but global payment schemes, and basically make sure that every day we have a settled amount that goes into MTD's account. The cost for that, and the entity is Elevon. They are massive and they deal with all this this backend information. That would just be the processing fees for payment, which is a much better deal than we could have gotten on our own. A transit processor basically handles what's called the fare engine, right? So we give them our information of this is what one ride costs. This is a 10 ride pass. This is what someone would pay here and there, all of our sort of fare structure. And that makes sure that, okay, somebody just tapped. Is this a valid payment card? Great. How much do we charge them? Great. And then it handles that piece. It also handles if a card were to tap and then it be declined, it kind of has a whole system about how it keeps pinging that account to try and get the amount. So the good thing is when someone boards, it's not like they're, swiping a card and then waiting and waiting and waiting, and then, something dings and they get on. There's a lot of complex back end work that happens, but at the end of the day, make sure that we get what we're owed. And the cost, and so the company that's doing that component is called Little Pay. And for the pilot, that's a $0 contract. The device manager, this is the hardware. This is the payment acceptance devices, or validator. And that's from a company called Kuba. And that is also $0 for the pilot. So the state is handling that aspect. So those are the three components, and the contracts are being worked up, have not yet been executed, but those are things that should be coming to us soon. Next slide. So that's all great, but what are we going to do with it? What does it mean for MTD? And so what we've devised with the team is basically a 3-phase approach. The first phase is that EMV contactless payment option for general riders. We're not getting enough validators for the whole system, but we are getting enough validators. I think we're getting about 21 of them that we could outfit a sub-fleet of our buses. The idea is to target this for the lines 12X and 24X. Since those lines are interlined and we're sort of endlessly trying to make them more efficient and things like that, they would be installed on that. They'd be installed at the front door and the back door. Part of that is because of COVID, and we're still boarding in the back door for right now. But it also could mean that down the road, we would have the ability to do all door boarding for people who are paying with contactless, which would be great. And so that's something that we're planning for. So we won't be able to outfit 21 buses. We'll be able to outfit basically half of that. And that extra one, we will be outfitting an articulated bus that has 3 doors. So that would have 3 validators. And the second phase is coming up with a contactless solution for UCSB staff and faculty. You may or may not be familiar with the system they have now. They have the TAP program, which is Transportation Alternatives Program. It's if you're a university employee and you worked a certain number of, you're employed for a certain number of months into the future, you can, and you work a certain number of hours, you can enroll in this program if you agree to like only either like not have a parking permit. There's a bunch of hoops you have to jump through to get this. And if you do, the university will subsidize a bus pass, a monthly pass for you up to $21. Now our monthly pass for standard adults is $52. So 21, it's a pretty good deal. But the individual pays the rest through a payroll deduction. It's kind of a complex system. I'm not telling tales out of school, the university would agree. But they really only have about 150 people enrolled. Now, obviously, the university is our largest employer. You can tell that that's a very tiny percentage of people who work there. So trying to come up with, and there's probably phases within phase 2, but a better, more seamless and efficient approach, both for us and the university and for, of course, the staff and faculty who ride our buses. Obviously, we know way more than 150 staff and faculty ride our buses, but not all those people are enrolled in the TAP program. So coming up with some type of solution where they could more seamlessly ride the bus would be great. And we have a project manager actually working on that. There's been meetings with the university on the technical side, on the sort of practical side, all kinds of things are happening on that. And then phase 3, obviously this is the big fish, but a contactless solution for university students. Now we technically have that now. It's technically contactless because they tap their ID, right? We used to have the stickers. We moved away from that. They tap their ID, but again, that's a closed loop system because it's the university card. They can use it around the university, but they can't say, go home to LA and use it on Metro, things like that. So coming up with that solution, it's going to take longer. So it's the latest phase. These months are a guess, but of course we know how this goes. It'll probably be later than that. But we are working to try to refine things and come up with it to move pretty quickly. Now, from all the ridership reports that university students are our largest sort of single segment of folks who ride the bus. And that would be huge. It would be a really big deal and actually could handle a lot of issues related to being unbanked or underbanked for students who, aren't currently, getting monthly allowances from mom and dad, right? So these are things that we're working on. We still have our past programs. We still will, but there may be different ways to handle this technically. Next slide, please. Okay, so validators. What's the deal? What do they look like? These are examples of the Kuba Validators. I have a video on the next slide, but just to explain where these would be mounted on stanchions in the bus. one by by the entrance and the front door, and then the second one by the back door on one of the stanchions there. They're pretty small. You'll be able to tell in the video a little better, but it does have a video. I mean, it does have a screen on it, obviously, that will tell people, if it's accepted, and then it can also have some other information on it. And if all works well, you'll get a satisfying beep when you and a green light when you tap and board. So next slide, see if we can play this video. Okay, so you heard the satisfying beep. This was an example of someone using a open loop payment card. Actually, the head of the whole Cal ITP program, Jillian, that was her whistling and her hand modeling. And so that's essentially what would happen. You can see it's not very big, and it tells you how much you were charged. One of the other things about this that I sort of talked about equity and this pay-as-you-go thing, this could open us up to, and this would be a discussion about our fare structure, but it would open us up to the ability to do what's called fare capping. And the idea would be that, right now it's $1.75 for one trip, but say you took 10 trips. We know now, right, that it's a better deal to buy a 10 ride pass up front. It's $11.50, but what if you don't have $11.50 all at once? You've got $175, a day at a time or a trip at a time, but you know that you're still going to ride the bus each day, right? Home and back again. So what fare capping would do is it would know that your specific credential, okay, this person rode in the morning, that's $1.75. They rode in the afternoon, that's another $1.75. But when that got up to enough trips in that week that they had paid $11.50, then for the rest of those 10 trips, right, however many trips you go through, the rest of those trips, they wouldn't be charged, right? So in that way, it'd be equitable. It still pays you go, but you're not paying full freight for each trip at the end of the day, right? You would along the way, but eventually, if you keep riding, you don't have to deal with that. Same for a 30-day pass. If you had gotten to $52, after that, it knows stop charging you. So that's something that we'd be able to do with this, something to look at, and it's kind of exciting. Definitely other agencies are starting to do that. And last thing I'll say on this is we're not alone. We're not the only one doing a pilot. They started out with Monterey Salinas Transit and Sacramento Regional Transit. Everyone's sort of looking at different components of the project and testing different aspects. All of them are testing this EMV contactless aspect, but I think MST has it on all of their whole fleet. And then they're looking at certain, the senior, they have a veterans discount, things like that. And then other agencies are looking at other components, but we're really interested in the sort of account-based system as you would have with the university. So while of course giving people the opportunity to try out this contactless system. So realize that was a lot. It was a very exciting program, and it's something that we wanted to share with you and see what kind of questions you have.
Great. Thank you, Hillary. It was a very exciting program and great presentation. I think I understand it. So I'm going to look to the board for questions or comments that they might want at this point. Anybody? Director Lindberg or Jen?
Yeah, question on, so if we have the verifiers, so the DMV or other, sources of information, where does that connect into sort of the three sections in terms of the payment processor, transit processor, device manager?
Good question. Yeah, that ends up, I'm pretty sure, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Jerry, but that ends up happening on the sort of the entity that deals with the fare engine and the rules. And I know all three of those names, like they all have the same words and they sound like the same thing, but it essentially the entity that deals with that component. Jerry, is that
It
correct?
would likely be the transit processing.
Right.
Other questions? Vice Chair Tabor.
Thanks for the presentation. It's good to see all that's taking place. Question of would this be an additional payment method, or would this be the only payment method when we get to the final of this project?
Yeah, this would be additional, definitely, as we roll it out. I don't know of any agency that's gone, well, except when they weren't collecting fares, that's gone cashless at this point. But it would, it would take time to grow for sure. But yeah, we don't see removing that. So for a while, we would have all manner. It could get to a point where we're able to phase out maybe our type of passes, but that would be a long time.
Yeah, I would add to that what we've discussed on the panel. It's kind of like an analogy, be like direct deposit. Early on, then maybe 80% of the folks stuck with checks, only 20% took advantage of that. And 15 years later, 10, it's flipped on its head. So I could see it, hopefully not taking that long for people to transition, but the opportunity would be there.
Good point. Director Sheeler, Bill.
Thank you, Chair. First, I just wanted to say I'm proud to see MTD taking the leadership role on this. So congratulations. I have a few things that I wanted to say. I'm very interested in this, so to all listen and find out this is really interesting. The first thing that percolated up to me was the idea of fare capping. I think that's a really great idea, and I think we need to incorporate that into a future broader discussion on fares. The next thing I wanted to talk about is this will be a significant, it seemingly will be a significant involvement of MTD's IT, and just wondering how you get your projections on what the future cost to MTD will be for system maintenance and updates, accounting and auditing. So that's kind of a question. It's great to step into the pool, but we're not really sure how deep it is and what the costs to the structure, administrative structure would be, and how those would be borne.
Yeah, I can take that one. At this stage, as you can see, we're the pilot phase, and it's pretty much no cost to MTD for 6 months. And what we decide to do from that point forward would be through a normal process for us. We'll evaluate, do the appropriate analysis to determine what the cost would be long-term around the hardware, software, and our resources, and we would bring that to the board. But I'm pretty confident that it's something that we can handle, but I also believe that it's something we need to handle going forward as an industry. We need to get to the point where people can utilize public transit as easily as they can go buy a coffee at Starbucks.
And in terms of ease, I agree completely. This is clearly where this is all headed. When you go to a concert, you can show your ticket on your phone, and rather than carrying other ways of handling this transaction. For UCSB or City College students or K through 12 students that use MTD, is there eventually a goal of having that be the way of doing, rather than having a phone and another ID that you need to show, so that it would all be contained in just one device?
Yeah, I mean, that is the idea. And again, it doesn't have to be even a device, right? It could just be a card. There's a lot of entities now that are coming up with payment cards where you don't have to have a bank account. I mean, you sort of have an account. You can store value on it, add to it, but you can have cash, right? There will be, like, say, for example, if you went to a CVS or a Walgreens and you wanted to top up your payment card with that, right? You'd be able to do that. So you don't even have to have an account to do that. So that's something that could have embedded in it, basically the credential of, like, okay, this is a Dos Pueblos High School student, and there's some kind of agreement, or we know that they are of a certain age and fall into one of our categories, then it could work that way. Obviously, a lot of people do have smartphones, but smart watches, all that kind of stuff. But it's something that, we want to make sure it's not just to have a device. But yes, to your point, ideally down the road, we'd be able to have that. We also see a lot of opportunity for large or small employers, right, to have a system where they are helping to subsidize their employees, trips to work on transit. And so that's something that I think would make it much easier. There are a lot of like really creative people in departments that, different agencies at county, things like that, where, 1/5 of their job is to deal with that, but they don't have the ability to come up with the whole structure for people to do it. If we could make it easier, I think we'd get a lot more, we could have a lot more sort of partnerships.
And speaking of partnerships, that's where I wanted to go next when you talk about eligibility and identity verification and all the kinds of different database exchanges that could be possible, but then also knowing that there's people that fall outside of databases and their data really doesn't exist, and making sure that there's a way for them to participate as well. One thing in the report on the steps, it talked about the California Air Resources Board. So presumably they're supportive of this, and just wondering if there's any bonuses or any cap and trade funding that becomes available as we're showing good faith efforts to participate in this.
Great question. My understanding is that there will be. So this program is paid for with cap and trade funds, but it's my understanding, sort of the way the winds are blowing, and if you'll recall that the governor recently did an executive order about infrastructure, transportation infrastructure, and the need to move very quickly to reduce GHG emissions in the transportation sector, which transportation is the biggest slice of the pie for emissions in California. And so there is not a visioning process, but there's a process that's just beginning. Actually, I think next week they put out the initial draft plan. There's going to be a bunch of meetings. We're going to participate in that. But it's my understanding that a lot of the transit funding components from cap and trade are going to have sort of participation in Cal ITP tied to that. So things like the Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program, which we've applied for once, we didn't get, but I imagine that we will apply for it every chance we get. That's every 2 years. So we'd be working on that at the end of this calendar year. It's my understanding that likely a component will be for that, not necessarily a condition of receiving a grant, but it would give you more points if you're participating in this type of project. So that could also happen for LC Top. So there's a lot of, it makes sense, right? The state has priorities. They also have this project that's a priority, tie them together, and you could get some better outcomes. So yes, I think this does place us very well for future funding and future support.
Thanks, that's good to hear. And I'll start to wrap up here. It looks like UCSB is a major partner in this, and that's a good place to start this. I was just wondering, when you get to phase 3 and the installation of the hardware, it seemingly would make sense to do that for the 24X and the 28 and the 27. Would that sort of be the plan?
Well, the initial
UCSB.
The initial plan, and this would be for the EMB, that's sort of for everyone, it could be people going to the university or not, is to have it on the 12 and 24X. Like I mentioned, we do want to outfit one of the articulated buses. Right now, we're not running the 28. The pandemic's sort of dictating what happens with that. But I think it's something that, depending on when our 6-month window starts, it's possible that's something that we could test out, because obviously it makes sense. The 28 is almost entirely people affiliated with the university. So it's something we're looking at, but the 12X and 24X gives us the opportunity to have one route be kind of university to downtown focus, but the other one is 12X, where a lot of kinds of people take that, and they're interlined, so it's the same bus, right? Which is great.
Yeah, I'd like to kind of highlight what we're doing here is we're helping the state to help us, our industry. And this is, again, probably a very controlled pilot. as far as participation early as we first learn and, essentially create the integration between all the different systems, the back end systems. As you can see, it's very complex what they're doing here. And then for smaller agencies like MTD, even smaller, what we're concerned with is the purchasing power, and not just the power, but the ability to act quickly and get through the procurement process, which is where the state is also. So they're working on a number of different fronts to help us. And what we're going to do with them, for them at this stage, is simply test that equipment, test that process in a very controlled way. Once they've refined everything, and I think they will, then we'll be in position, hopefully, to make a bigger commitment to this entire product for our industry. So I'm looking forward to bringing that to you in the future.
Those were my questions and comments. Thank you, Chair.
Good, thanks. It led me right into when I was looking at some of the details in the slide. Demonstration projects, they talked about a 6-month demonstration, and at the end, you'd have to go into separate agreements. Is that essentially how our pilot would roll out also?
Yeah, our pilot would be, the agreements are there. We're working on that. The state is leading that. They're covering that as part of the demonstration project. And once it's complete, then it'll be up to us who we want to work with, what's available to us through those contracting, through the contracting process at the state.
Okay, great. And then just lastly on the timing issue, Hillary, when would you see our 6 months starting? Just best case.
Good question. So I mentioned the place we're at now is the contracting piece, which I think it'll take less time than nearly any contracting we normally do, because it's really, been fully vetted, more places than just us. And so that's being handled now. We're having weekly meetings with the project team. And so it's sort of starting to quicken and pace. I would say, it's definitely going to be a couple months, but it does seem that we're pretty close, once the contracts are executed, to actually having the devices shipped, and then getting that up and running. As far as when people would be able to actually interact with it, I think we'll have like a test phase, sort of, for lack of a better term, friends and family test, right? To be able to test things out. And then obviously there would be significant marketing communications, which again, the project team has that information. We don't have to create it, from whole cloth, which is great, about how to talk to people about how to use it. So, and then we would also make sure that those buses that are outfitted with those have some kind of marking on the outside, sort of like maybe right by the doors, little decal or whatever that shows, you can pay this way on this bus. So.
Yeah, my question, I was kind of like wondering whether it was going to, I don't know, come in sync with a reopening in September, if in fact something,
I expect it would be before that for sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
And one thing that would be even cooler if it would be in sync with or close to when we start collecting fares again.
Yeah, great presentation. Thank you so much for that. Christina, I'm going to ask, is there anyone from the public who wants to comment?
Woohoo! No, we don't have any public comment for this item.
Great. Okay. Well, this is an informational item which we will hear more about as we go forward. So again, thank you so much for the presentation.
I think Chuck had his hand up.
Yeah,
Oh, Chuck.
question. Assuming the demonstration program proves out, is the long-term objective of this system change, would it require an additional card? And then I'm not sure what the answer to that is, but then is the objective to then let a transit user go between different systems, like say between here and Gold Coast, or to go further on the train, and once you get to your destination, be able to use that card? And then the third thing that I have a question about is it talks about people that don't have necessarily the income currently to use the cards, how would that work? How would that benefit them? I mean, I understand what we're doing with the demonstration program, but the long-term objective, I'm just not quite sure how that's going to work.
Yeah, I think I could quickly answer. I think there were 3 questions. Number 1, not necessarily as it pertains to a specific transit card being created. It's possible, but not necessary. Number 2, seamless integration among transit operators. Yes, that's the whole goal, is to be able to, go from Santa Barbara MTD, Santa Maria to the Bay Area to your local Starbucks, whatever it is. So seamless integration on the payment side. And then on the third one, I mean, I think how I feel, I'll give you an example, the 30-day bus pass, $52 up front to get that discount. And a lot of our riders can't afford that, to put out that money. And that's been something I've said for years. And as a result, with the system like this and the fare capping feature, you can address that inequity. So I'm really, really excited about that in particular for our riders. So I'm excited. And I think the answer to all 3 of your questions is positive for our industry in the long run.
Chuck, I think you're muted.
You're muted, Chuck. He's trying. There you go. Oh, you're muted again. Sorry. Try again. There you go. There you go. You're on now.
Okay. Let's say a person wanted to go south, say to San Clemente, and use different systems. Would the card automatically charge what the rate is for that other system that the traveler would be using?
Yeah, ideally, if the you could, and they're speaking with Amtrak as well. So if you were to take the bus to the train station here in Santa Barbara, hop on, head down to San Clemente, get off the Surfliner, and then hop on whatever system you're in down there. Ideally, yeah, you don't even have a specific transit card. It's just linked. You have sort of a mobile credential, right? It's linked. You could go that and pay the same way on all of those, and it would know, because of that sort of fare engine, it would know what to charge you all along the way.
Well, you have seen the future, and it is us. I like it. Sounds really great. Really good. Okay. Any other questions and comments before I move on? Okay. Again, Hillary, thank you for the presentation. Look forward to seeing it roll out. Item 9, fiscal year 2020-2021 second quarter performance reports.
Okay, Chair Davis, I will hand this off, actually the next 2 agenda items, to Ms. Blackerby, our Planning and Marketing Manager. And I know we're running probably a little bit long, so we'll do our best to keep to the schedule. Thank you.
There you go.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, you're not done with me yet, but we'll move through this one fairly quickly. You're familiar with the structure of this report at this point, so we can go to the next slide. These are the key performance indicators we'll talk about through each of these slides. It's the same as every quarter. Next slide. Not much news here with regards to fare category, because obviously ridership's down significantly because of the pandemic and our capacity restrictions. Other includes free, and we've not collected fares now for actually almost a year, but in the second quarter of this fiscal year, we did not collect fares. So that is why it's in the other category. Next slide. Passenger hours and miles, you can see the numbers for the second quarter of this fiscal year as compared to last. And then for year to date, you can see the total passengers. So, last fiscal year in the second quarter, we had 1.7 million passengers. This year we had 578,000. And so you can see pacing year to date, we are obviously less than half. And then, passengers per revenue hour and passengers per mile. Obviously, we're down on all those fronts. You can see revenue miles is something we're very proud of, but our revenue hours and miles have not gone down, 60 some percent. We still have a great deal of service out there on the street for our community. Next slide. This is year to date. So this is first and second quarter combined, top 5 lines by ridership. This is not a huge surprise. A lot of sort of essential workers, essential jobs, people getting to where they need to go on these lines. And so you can see line 11 and line 6, line 1 and 2, and line 20. Those are our workhorse lines. We knew they were before, but we really know they are now. In the pandemic, they've been our strongest lines throughout the pandemic. And we're proud to say that on all those lines, we still run a regular schedule every day of the week. Next slide. Top 5 lines by passengers per hour. Just a reminder that our current limit and has been, though it wasn't for the whole second quarter, in mid or sort of late December, I think the 22nd of December, we brought our capacity down from 15 to 12. This is when the COVID numbers were really peaking. And so we reduced that. But even so, you can see that generally our highest one is line 1 on the west side, 18.6 passengers per hour. A reminder that's a very short route. And so some of these compare, it's a little different. Obviously, the line 11, the line 6, it's a very, very long route. But you can see these numbers are pretty healthy considering our capacity restrictions. So next slide. Year-to-date numbers, total ridership down 64%. Our 2 full aboard loads, it's very common, obviously, they're up 155.4%. And I mentioned this the past couple, but our at capacity loads, this is down, but basically because there used to be a differentiation between at capacity and 2 full aboard, which we used to have a lot, like out in Isla Vista especially, but now they've really pivoted to just marking 2 full aboard because we actually have a specific number capacity restriction at 12 or 15. And so that's why that at capacity loads. Are our loads at capacity? Yes, very often, but that's just not the metric we're using at this point. For the year, wheelchair boardings are down 25%, but again, considering total ridership is down 64%. We can see it's obviously a very important service that we provide, that we have ADA accessible transportation. And then bicycles, again, this has been a story all year that while that's down, it's only down 2.7%. So really, as compared to ridership, it's up by a lot because we have 64% less riders, but only 2% less bikes, or 3%. So that's something that we're continuing to monitor, and it's great. A lot more people have bikes now, and they're able to extend their trip. So I see even after the pandemic, that will be a real benefit, that folks will be able to be more multimodal going forward. Next slide. On-time performance. So you may have noticed in past months, we had, so our standard is we want to keep everything above 80% on time, at least. And we've done that so well now over the past year that we're actually changing the colors on these donut charts because they were just getting to be all green, mostly dark green, and some light green. So now we've sort of upped the ante here and upped the percentages. So the dark green is actually lines that were above 95% on time, which is darn near perfect. And that's 8, that was 8 of our lines. And then 7 of our lines were between 90 and 95% on time, or 94.9% on time. And then only 1 line was between 85 and 90, and it was actually at 88%, which again, I'll take it. That's very good. And that was the line 20. So there's none below 80, but there's not even any below 85 for the second quarter. That's something we're really proud of. Obviously, we know there's a little less traffic out there, but functionally, this is something that points to the work that we've done over the past several years to really refine our on-time performance. Super proud of this, proud of the team, proud of our bus operators keeping us on schedule. And so, yeah, this is very exciting. Next slide. This is the last slide. Again, I will never hesitate to bring you a 100% donut chart that, again, based on system-wide on-time performance by amount of service on lines. If we were doing worse, this would be a more interesting chart. But basically looking at all the lines and how many trips each one has in a quarter, which, fun fact, 73,249 trips. Those were all above 80%. So that is my last slide on this. Happy to take any questions.
Great. Thank you, Hillary. We sure do live in interesting times. That's all I can say. Questions from the board? Okay, I'll go to Director Member, and then I'll come to Director Sheila. Member, Jen?
Sure. So first of all, as a stats person, I just want to express my appreciation for having no pie charts in here, which are not the best visualizations of data. So I appreciate the tree map, which I call a brownie chart as opposed to a pie chart. So brownies and donuts instead of pies. So thank you for that. And one question, so this isn't in one of the slides, but I'm curious on the fleet maintenance report. The hybrids look like they have a decrease in the total cost per mile. And wondering if that's an expectation of continuing on with the hybrid, or if that is far more an artifact of the pandemic.
Yeah, I think it has more to do with the pandemic and the fact that we have, with so many lines suspended, but we still have the fleet operational. It's throwing things a little bit out of whack on some of those numbers. Some of the fleet may be in for more maintenance, which could bring up the cost, or vice versa. So yeah, I would say it's a little skewed. I'd want to get back. If we're going to talk about fleet allocation and the future of it, we're probably going to be coming back in the future with a discussion of that as a result of the pandemic.
And then one more question of just, you mentioned this, Hillary, on the bicycles essentially increased. Do we have any idea or indications, or have we taken actions that we think might be related, or is this also just something we're watching and hopeful on?
Yeah, I mean, I think the national trend of, so many, like, you can't even get a bike these days because they're so back ordered, that a lot more people are using bikes to either take a trip entirely or to complete their trip. We've always had a lot of people bring bikes on board and, on our front racks, but I think it's, this is speculation, but I have a feeling it could be that some people are, a trip that normally they might take completely by bus. Now they're doing sort of the hardest part on the bus and then biking the rest of the way, which functionally for us, again, if we were collecting fares, we're still collecting fares for them. It doesn't really matter how long or short their trip is. And so, I think it's a great team effort, I guess, between us and the bike. But yeah, I think it's just up. Bike ridership has exploded, bike ownership has exploded. And so it's something we're really, really seeing. It's something that is interesting to be able to see what's happening in the world of bikes just by looking at one of our numbers.
Great, thanks.
Dr. Sheila, Bill.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to follow up on the last point about the bikes. Yeah, the bikes per passenger mile are actually up. I recall a while back when there was discussion about increasing the number of racks that would hold bikes. Did that ever happen, or did that not happen? And is there any chance to move from 2 to 3 positions on the bike racks?
Yeah, I'll take that. Likely with our new flyers or new buses we're purchasing, we're going to go with the 3 bike rack. Beyond that, it's really going to come down to funding and what we want to do with the rest of the fleet. But we'll probably start with that, and we'd want to work closely with our operators and work with them to extend the length of the bus.
Oh, well, that's good news. Nice to hear there's some possible improvement there. The next thing I wanted to talk about was the customer service report. If somebody could tell me if I'm reading this correctly, it was under Q2 passenger boardings per complaint, and our goal is always to have, should average no more than 1 complaint per 10,000 passenger boardings. So as I look at this, is it correct that the number of complaints per passenger boardings actually increased from last year?
It did, but of course, there's a lot fewer passenger boardings. So,
Right.
yeah, so that's what I would explain. We don't have a deluge of complaints. We have a lot fewer complaints than we normally do, but obviously there's a lot fewer people riding the bus, which kind of gets you on both sides of that metric.
And I know with it's just been difficult for operators in this situation, and the fact that there's a lot of too full to boards as well. I just thought it was curious that actually increased per number of boardings when actually fares don't exist and it's for free. The last thing I wanted to talk about is the fleet maintenance report. And I'm always looking at the comparison of the larger fleet and our electric fleet now, which is the BYDs. And I initially, and I understood the reason why, because BYD was covering a lot of the expenses still associated with us taking on the buses, that the cost per mile was less on the BYDs than on the rest of the fleet, and understood that would level out over time. I was just surprised to see how much in 1 year the cost of the BYDs per mile went up from 73 cents per mile to 163. And the thing that I didn't understand was the miles per kilowatt hour went down. It was 0.067, it went down to 0.047. So I don't understand that efficiency ratio of kilowatt hours, because that clearly affects the total cost per mile. And I was hoping that the electric fleet would ultimately prove itself to be at least equal to, or at least cost effective.
Yeah, I think early on with the fleet, as you recall, as you stated, we had the warranty item. But in this last year during the pandemic, especially the first half of the year, we weren't operating the BYDs much. And instead we returned the fleet back to BYD to do quite a bit of work on the fleet while the fleet was down. And that was helpful. So you see the cost for the fleet has increased, but the usage has decreased as well. So it's skewing the numbers down the other way. So I'd say, you really need to wait till we get through the pandemic and we're operating the fleet, I think, on a regular basis, which we've started to in the last few months, to really get a feel for what the costs are. So I think we're still a ways out from really having a good figure there.
Let me just follow up on that, because that does make sense. But the cost per kilowatt hour, has there been a significant cost in electrical prices over the last year? Or is that some issue, is the less you use the buses, the worse your mileage is in terms of kilowatt hour?
I'd have to take a deeper look at that with the maintenance department and get back to you on that to see if there was an issue with the time of day, perhaps when we were charging previously to when we're charging now, to be able to answer that question. So I can get back.
Thanks. Yeah, I just hope this isn't a trend. It is just an anomaly. Thank you. That's all my questions.
Okay, other questions? Director McCory.
Yeah, a couple of things. Number one, on the twofold aboard, have we had any success, or are we trying to boost the line 11 and the line 20, where we have those long trips and people can't get on board?
We have been, yes. As we've been able to step up a little more, we've sort of devised several booster combos, basically, where we watch every day to see what the ridership is like and how many two-fold boards there are and on what trips. And so we have a good package of booster combos, like I said, where, you know, someone on the extra board or driver who's available, right, isn't out in regular service, would be able to go and say, okay, you're going to do a 6 out and 11 back in, and then you do a 20, because these are specific trips that we know are overloaded most of the time or at those times of day. And so we have been able to do that. And the ridership on those boosters for those lines is pretty significant. So we know there's definitely demand out there, especially for, you know, 6, 11, 20, 1 and 2. So we're continuing to watch that. But yes, we have been able to, when we have the individuals able, you know, available to go run those, we have been doing that, which has been nice to be able to do.
So do we just use the extra board for that, or do we just take somebody that's at the end of one run and shoot them down there to boost either one of those 2 lines?
Generally the extra board. Yeah, that's just because, you know, most of the other people who have a regular run, you know, they've got a whole day of work already. So we've packaged these booster combos into a day's work.
Okay, yeah, because it does kind of lessen the pain of those, especially on those 2 lines where people aren't able to get on board for a long trip. The second question I have is, since we don't have the shuttle service in place right now, how are the BYDs working out on other lines?
They're running on the line 3 right now. And so that's a line where we normally would use a 30-foot diesel. And so we've been running them on the 3, and it's been working okay. There's a little bit less room on them, just how they're laid out, kind of social, you know, sort of physical distancing wise. But they've been working pretty well on the 3. So it looks a little weird to me anyway. I just saw one the other day. I was near Cottage, and you're like, so what's the shuttle doing here? But
are we trying them on any other shorter line? Because, you know, going from the number of buses on shuttle routes to just the 3, I don't know. Do the numbers work out that we can do that and still not kill our spare ratio?
If I can take that one. Currently, you know, the spare ratio is kind of secondary factor, and I think FTA recognizes that due to the pandemic. So we're kind of setting that aside. We're going to our FTA training review, and we'll have that discussion, Chuck. But I think long term, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to have to come back to the board, and we're going to have to talk about future service levels and what that means for the fleet allocation. So, for example, with the BYD fleet in particular, we have 14 BYD battery electric buses, of which about 8 were allocated to downtown waterfront shuttle service, which has been terminated. You know, the funding isn't there. We're going to need to come back to you with that and then make a recommendation as to how we reallocate those 8 buses, or those 8 buses as you're pointing out. So that's coming probably in the next couple of months to the board, and what that means for our fleet size.
So just for my fuzzy brain, does that mean it's kind of impractical to try and use the shuttle buses on some of the long routes?
Not at all. What it means is we're exploring that currently by putting some of them on the 3. We'll probably be testing it on a few of the other routes here soon, but we want to come back with a more thorough explanation of what we think the long-term, you're posing the right question. You're about a month or 2 ahead of us, but we are doing what we need to do to prepare to answer that question for you and what we're going to do with that fleet.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions? All good questions today. Enjoyed the questions themselves. Okay, great. Hillary, thank you for that. And we're going to move on then. If you don't mind, we'll go on to.
Chair, you're a little muffled. It's a little hard to hear you.
How about that? Any better?
Yeah, better.
Okay. Plug it in, it works. So anyway, we're gonna move on to item 10, if you don't mind. This is the livery design for the 40-foot electric buses. You wanna do a real short one here, Hillary, and
Still muffled, it turns out.
then I'll get off.
Okay.
So, item 10, this is the design for the 40-foot electric buses. You want to do a short presentation, and what I'd like to do is basically take a straw poll and see where people are on the design and go from there.
Great, thank you. And just to note, in the staff report, I mentioned the survey that we did. 74 individuals weighed in on the 3 designs. And you'll see them here. I showed them to you at the last meeting, but you can review these, get input, but ideally walk away here today with with a plan so that we can get the design to the manufacturer. But you can see people were asked to rank them sort of in order of most favorite to least favorite, and design B came back with 43% of respondents selecting as their first choice. Design A came in second with 39%, and then design C came in last with 18%. If you do all the ranking calculations, because people could pick their second favorite and all that, sort of a ranked choice voting type thing, you can see what the outcome was. But anyway, so these are the different designs. Just quickly go through them because I already did this at the last meeting, but the first design, design A, you see here, has similar, obviously, scheme to our most recent purchase of Gillig buses with the waves. But it does have that additional pinstripe, a little bit of motion in the wave. And then at the rear of the bus, there's a lightning bolt, and the back is all dark blue. And it says all electric up there on the roofline. Second design. This is design B. This also has the pinstripe. The front is similar to, or almost the same to the first design. But in the rear, it has an all electric sort of logo mark up towards the roofline with a leaf/road over the I in electric. And then that carries to the back with the blue and the teal on the rear. It does leave the lower half of the back white, which is often preferred by maintenance for several reasons. So that's design B. And then design C is basically the most similar to our current fleet. The pinstripe's not there. The front and the back are essentially the same. This is a little bit taller of a bus. So on our current buses, actually looking at one out my window now, it's on the rear of the bus. It's not blue at the top. It's just that darker teal. But because of the batteries up above, it goes up a little higher. And so there's a little bit of blue on the top of the back, and then the teal, and again, has the white down below. This also has a variation on that all electric logo mark, with the leaf and road being after the text instead of as part of it or up above. So I know they're not all drastically different, but we want it, the goal is we want something to fit with our overall fleet, but we also want it to be clear that it's a little bit different, that it's all electric. So with that, I'll hand it over to the board.
Okay, so I would like to basically, again, we want to do comments, but I'd like to just do a straw poll real quickly by a raise of hands. And I'm just going to go through them and just see where people are, because this might be pretty simple here. Anybody who wants to basically their first preference be bus A? Okay, bus B. Okay, and Paula was at B also. So that's 4 Bs. So I think we got a pretty good consensus here 4 basically for B. So I don't know, Hillary, if you need any more motion in that. I would let the record show that the board preferred design B as the chosen selection. Jen, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I'm just curious. I preferred the horizontal all electric. So thinking of the horizontal on design B was just one of the things that I had. Because I think it flows better.
That's a good comment. Hillary, comment on that?
Yeah, we have, if you could flip back to design B. So that's a possibility. We have to have sort of final design discussions with our designer. There will be little tweaks here and there, but we can take a look at sort of what looks best on that with this. But I appreciate the feedback from everyone and the sort of straw poll. As to your question, Chair Davis, I think that's enough. The people have spoken and the board has spoken. Yeah. So we can move forward with that, and there may be little refinements that we make, but happy that we have something to move forward with.
Great. Fantastic. Good comment, Jen. And Hillary, I want to congratulate. So getting 79 respondents on a thing like this, pretty good, actually. I was really surprised. So good job. Good job.
Thank you.
Okay. Moving right on.
Chair,
Go ahead.
Chair Davis, do we need a first or a second motion on this?
No, I was just going to basically indicate that the board preferred design B. That's all you
Fantastic.
need. It's basically by consensus.
Thank you. And there's no public comment.
No public comment. Exactly right. You got it. Okay. I'm not moving too fast, am I? Item 11, conflict of interest code update. Mr. Estrada.
I'll be quick. The board has adopted the conflict of interest code policy a number of months ago, but the county did ask us to make some formatting changes, which our attorney has done, and that's what you have before you. So it's pretty much a straightforward request.
Okay. Any questions on the item? Director Tabor.
Yes. Normally, when I see something underlined, it indicates to me an addition. So I just want to make sure in section 1 that underlined second paragraph, it's all underlined, is not an addition as well.
Yeah, I believe that's correct.
Yeah, I had the same question. Anything else? Any public comment?
No, sir, we have no public comment.
Excellent. Okay. Motion is to request that we approve the recommended changes, conflict of interest code. Do I have a motion to approve?
I'll move to approve.
Okay, motion by Director McGorry. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Director Lindberger. Okay, I'm going to do just a show of hands. All those in favor, raise your hands. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Okay. Takes us to item 12, General Matters Report. The floor is yours, Jerry.
Yeah, I'll be quick. The one item I just wanted to update you on that list, happy to answer any questions, is the driver barrier project. We mentioned about 48 of them have been completed. We're well into the 50s at this point, and it's moving along. The biggest issue has been just supply, getting enough parts and components to move along quicker. But for the most part, it's going along well.
Good, great. Item 13, other business reports. We don't have any committee reports to report out. Jerry, is there any other business at this time? Oh, Chuck, there you go.
I guess I'm not muted.
You're on. You're good.
Request, when we get our board packet, could we get the current bus book?
Certainly. We'll make it happen.
Good. Okay. Let's see, nothing else, no other business at the current time. That takes us to the last item, adjourn. No other business, Jerry, our next meeting?
We are scheduled for another meeting, regular scheduled meeting in 2 weeks on the 16th. And I do think we'll need to have that meeting.
Great, very good. Let the record show we are adjourning the meeting at 10:16. Everybody stay safe and have a good week.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, guys.